The plane touched down with a shudder, and I felt the vibration ripple through me as if my body itself understood. This was no longer the dream. This was the beginning. Spain. The word pulsed in my chest as I followed the stream of passengers through El Prat Airport, my suitcase rattling behind me like an impatient companion. The air already carried a difference. Warmer, thicker, tinged with salt and something smoky I couldn't quite name. Even the silence seemed alive here, restless, waiting to break into rhythm. The taxi ride into the city blurred into a ribbon of light and motion. Billboards in Catalan flashed past, words I couldn't pronounce yet felt tempted to taste on my tongue. Palm trees bent in the coastal wind, their shadows swaying across the asphalt. Scooters darted recklessly between cars, drivers leaning forward with practiced ease, as if chaos was the only traffic rule that mattered. I pressed my forehead to the glass, eyes wide, drinking in everything at once. The driver hummed under his breath, a melody twined with a guitar on the radio, and I thought, even the quiet here is threaded with music. Barcelona revealed itself slowly, like a curtain tugged open by invisible hands. Streets grew narrower, buildings leaned inward, balconies spilling flowers over wrought iron railings. The sidewalks teemed with the voices, Catalan, Spanish, English, laughter that rose and fell in waves. Every doorway breathed aromas into the night. Garlic sizzling in oil, bread pulled from ovens, the faint perfume of oranges from late stalls. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. After hours of sterile airplane air, my lungs ached with the sheer density of life pressing into them. I dropped my bag in the hotel without really seeing the room. 4 walls, a bed, a shuttered window. None of it mattered. My body was exhausted, but my soul was thrumming, unwilling to waste a second. I went back out, following my feet without plan or map, letting the city tug me deeper. The streets wound like veins, curving into shadows that dared me to follow. Lamps glowed above, their golden halo smudged against the night sky. Somewhere ahead, music threaded the air, and I chased it like a moth chasing flame. The sound grew louder, layered with clapping and laughter until I stumbled into a plaza strung with lanterns. The light poured down onto cobblestones polished by centuries of footsteps. And at its heart, the circle. Musicians crouched on low stools, guitars in their hands, fingers flying. Their notes were quick, sharp, burning. Palms clapped in rhythm, stamping heels struck sparks from the ground. And then she moved into the center. A woman in a red dress, her body slicing through the air, her heels speaking a language older than memory. Her hair snapped with each turn, her arms carved stories out of the lantern light. The crowd roared approval, their voices rising together like a single jubilant heartbeat. At first I stood at the edge, always at the edge, where it felt safe. My heart pounded, my breath quickened, but my feet hesitated. I thought, I'll watch. I'll remember. I'll write it down later. But Barcelona has no patience for watchers. A man caught my eye, grinned wide, and before I could resist, his hand grasped mine. The pull was gentle but irresistible. In an instant, I was inside the circle. Laughter tore out of me, unpracticed but real, as I tried to follow the rhythm. My steps were clumsy, my body stiff, but none of it mattered. The music swallowed my hesitation. The crowd clapped louder, urging, forgiving, insisting. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't calculating or correcting. I was simply moving, swept by a pulse larger than myself. Shoes kicked off, toes against warm stone. I spun until my breath came ragged, until my voice rose into the night with theirs. The hours blurred. Wine stained my lips, rich and dark, humming through my veins like another instrument in the song. Tapas passed across counters, salty, spicy, sweet, each bite exploding against my tongue. Someone pressed a slice of bread into my hand, someone else refilled my glass, and every gesture felt like an invitation. Barcelona didn't ask for introductions. It claimed you outright. Later, I found myself leaning against a balcony railing, the city still alive below me. The lanterns glowed on, shadows swaying across the walls as if the night itself had joined the dance. Beyond the lights, the sea stretched wide and dark, whispering secrets to anyone who dared listen. Its breath smelled of salt and distance, of journeys waiting. I closed my eyes, the laughter still echoing in my chest, and thought, this is what it means to belong. Not forever, not even tomorrow, but completely in this moment. Barcelona did not ask me to understand it. It asked me to surrender. And I did.
Morning in Barcelona arrived like a splash of paint across the sky, bold, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. I pushed open the shutters of my small hotel room and was greeted with a riot of color. Narrow balconies dripping with flowers, laundry fluttering like flags of daily life, the sun already gilding the tops of terracotta roofs. The street below was alive before I even had my shoes on. Vendors rolled carts into place, their voices rising in cheerful bargaining. Scooters weaved through pedestrians with casual defiance, and from somewhere nearby came the hiss of coffee machines, promising the first sip of the day. I stepped outside, pulled instantly into the current. The city didn't allow drifting. It swept you forward, turning every corner into a discovery. I found myself at La Boqueria, the famous market, though it felt less like a tourist stop and more like a carnival of the senses. Colors collided on every stall, pyramids of oranges, glistening cherries, figs split open to reveal their jeweled insides. The air smelled of spice and salt, saffron, paprika, smoked ham. A woman with a scarf tied tightly around her hair handed me a paper cone overflowing with jamón ibérico, the slices translucent, salty sweet as they melted on my tongue. The aisles buzzed with sound, vendors calling, knives chopping, children begging for sweets. I lingered at a stall where fresh juice was poured into tall plastic cups, the colors glowing like liquid jewels. Ruby pomegranate, neon mango, pale green kiwi. I chose one at random, cold against my palm, and wandered deeper into the maze of stalls, letting the juice stain my lips with sugar and sun. From there, I walked toward the city's beating heart, the works of Antonio Gaudí. Even from a distance, the Sagrada Familia rose like something dreamt, not built. Its tower spiraling upward, unfinished yet eternal. Standing beneath it, I felt small in the best way possible. The details were endless, stone twisting like vines, figures emerging from walls as if caught between life and memory. Inside, light streamed through stained glass in floods of blue and green, orange and red. It didn't feel like entering a church. It felt like stepping into the ribs of some vast, benevolent creature, alive with color and breath. I wandered next down Paseo de Gracia, where Gaudí's other creations leaned against the city like playful secrets. Casa Batalló with its rippling facade, bones and scales shining in the sun. Casa Milà, all curves and shadows, a building that seemed to breathe. Tourists craned their necks, snapped photographs, but I just stood there, notebook in hand, sketching the curve of a balcony, the swirl of a window. For a moment, I forgot where I was from. I forgot where I was going. I was simply here, trying to catch a fragment of genius in a hurried line of ink. By midday, the sun pressed hard against the streets, and I ducked into a cafe to escape the heat. The interior was dim, cool, filled with the smell of espresso and cinnamon. A barista with tired eyes and a kind smile switched easily between Spanish and Catalan, finally laughing as I stumbled through my order in broken phrases. He slid a café con leche across the counter, the foam art a little crooked, and when I thanked him, he answered softly, "De nada, viajera," traveler. The word settled into me like a benediction. I sat by the window, notebook open, sipping the bitter smooth coffee. Outside, the street thrummed, but inside, time slowed. I listened to the chatter around me, the scrape of spoons against cups, the distant guitar drifting in from the plaza. I wrote quickly, afraid the sensations would slip away. The taste of jamón, the way sunlight fractured in Gaudi's windows, the kindness of strangers who didn't know my name but called me traveler anyway. As the afternoon waned, I realized how full I felt, not only in body but in spirit. Barcelona had given me its abundance without hesitation, had swept me into its dance without asking if I was ready. And yet, in the quiet of the cafe, another thought stirred. For all the noise and color, I longed for balance, for a place where I could lean against a railing, glass of wine in hand, and watch a city breathe more softly. Paris appeared in my mind then, not loud, but luminous. A balcony at dusk, rooftops stretching toward a twilight sky, the hum of a violin somewhere far below. My chest tightened with anticipation. Barcelona had taught me how to surrender. Paris, I suspected, would teach me how to linger.
My last evening in Barcelona unfolded slowly, as if the city itself knew how reluctant I was to let go. I spent the late afternoon wandering without direction, my feet carrying me away from the crowded avenues and deeper into the quieter veins of the city. The air was still warm, holding the faint spice of the market and the sweetness of oranges I had eaten earlier. I traced my hand along the cool stone walls of narrow alleys, every turn opening onto a new secret, a hidden courtyard, a tiny bakery, a mural of colors so bright it seemed to glow. By the time I reached the waterfront, the sky had begun to soften, streaked with gold and lavender. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly before me, waves rolling in, slow, deliberate breaths. I took off my shoes and walked along the sand, letting the water chase my ankles, my toes sinking into the cool grit. Children shouted in the distance, their voices tumbling with the sound of gulls. Couples strolled with ice cream cones, stopping to kiss as if the world existed only for them. And for a moment, I simply stood there, watching the horizon blur, feeling both very small and deeply alive. As the sun slid lower, I returned to the city's heart. Barcelona at night was not so different from Barcelona by day. It did not quiet. It did not dim. The lanterns above the plazas glowed brighter. Music threaded itself through the air again. Laughter rose as naturally as the tide. I found myself in a square where musicians played flamenco with such intensity that even passers-by stopped to clap in rhythm. I leaned against a railing, sipping a glass of wine, the dark liquid catching reflections of firelight and faces, and thought, this was how Spain said goodbye, not with silence, but with another invitation to live. I stayed longer than I meant to, losing track of hours. The plaza became my world, the hum of voices, the sweet salt of tapas shared across tables, the sway of dancers moving like shadows under the lamps. Yet beneath the joy, I felt something shift. Barcelona had given me abundance, rhythm, color, and sound, and I had let myself be carried. But I sensed that the journey ahead asked for something else. Not surrender, not noise, but stillness. A chance to step back and simply watch. When I finally walked back to the hotel, shoes in hand again, the streets hummed around me, alive with stories I would never know. I paused once more at the balcony, looking out toward the sea, the lights of ships scattered like stars across the water. My chest ached, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Spain had been the first embrace of Europe, fiery and unrestrained, and I knew it would echo in me long after I left. Yet, my mind was already wandering north to a city that promised a different kind of intimacy. Paris rose before me in imagination, quiet streets glistening after rain, rooftops unfolding toward the horizon, a balcony where I could lean with a glass of wine, watching the twilight settle like silk. Barcelona had taught me how to surrender to life's dance. Paris, I thought, would teach me how to linger in its pauses.
The morning after, the sea, the laughter, and the plaza that had carried me into the night, I woke with a strange mixture of heaviness and lightness. My body was tired, but my mind was restless, tugging me back into the city before I had even finished my coffee. There was still so much to see, and one name kept echoing in my thoughts: Gaudí. If the night had shown me Barcelona's heartbeat, then Gaudí, I suspected, would show me its soul. I followed the flow of people until the narrow streets opened into something vast. And there it was, La Sagrada Familia. Even after seeing it 1,000 times in photographs, nothing prepared me for the way it rose into the sky. The towers looked like they were still stretching, still growing, as if the stone itself had a pulse. I stopped walking. The crowd swirled around me, but I felt rooted, unable to move for long minutes. The facade wasn't just architecture. It was a living story. Saints and vines, creatures and angels, each detail etched with such care that I could imagine the sculptor's hands trembling as they worked. Stepping inside was like stepping into another world. Light shattered into colors across the floor, stained glass turning the air into ribbons of green, red, gold, and blue. I tilted my head back and felt dizzy, as though I had wandered into a forest of stone, pillars branching like trees overhead. The silence here wasn't empty. It was music slowed into stillness, every echo a note. I pressed my palm to one of the columns and thought, maybe beauty is not in perfection, but in the courage to keep building, even if the work may never be finished. Outside again, the streets led me to Casa Batillo. Its facade shimmered in the sun like scales, balconies shaped like bones. It was playful, a little eerie, and undeniably alive. I traced the curves with my eyes and wondered what it would feel like to live in a place that refused to obey rules. Next came Casa Miao, with its undulating walls and chimneys that looked like soldiers turned to stone. I walked slowly, unwilling to miss a single shadow. It felt like Gaudí had whispered to the city, "Don't be ordinary," and the city had listened. By afternoon, I climbed toward Park Güell. The path wound upward until the city stretched below me like a mosaic. The park itself was a riot of color. Benches coiled like serpents, tiles broken and remade into patterns that shimmered in sunlight. I sat on one of those benches, the ceramic cool under my hands, and watched children run past, their laughter mingling with the music of a guitarist playing nearby. Couples leaned against each other, tourists posed awkwardly for photos, and I simply breathed it in. The park didn't ask for stillness, but it gave it anyway. As I sketched a line of the mosaic in my notebook, I realized Barcelona had revealed another side of itself. At night, it was chaos and rhythm, demanding I surrender. By day, through Gaudí, it was a reminder that imperfection could be magnificent, that broken pieces could be remade into something stronger, brighter, unforgettable. And though I wasn't ready to leave, I could already feel the pull of what waited next. Paris. A city not of riots of color, but of quiet rooftops and balconies. Where Barcelona danced, Paris lingered. Where Spain taught me to surrender, France, I suspected, would teach me to pause, to savor. I smiled, imagining myself with a glass of wine leaning against a railing while the city whispered beneath me. The rhythm of Barcelona changed when I left behind the great landmarks and let myself wander aimlessly. I stepped off the main avenues and slipped into streets so narrow that balconies almost touched above my head. Laundry hung like flags of daily life, colors flooding in the breeze, while old women leaned out of windows, their conversations carrying down to the cobblestones below. Here, the city no longer felt like spectacle. It felt like someone's home, breathing and ordinary, yet no less beautiful. I let myself get lost. That was the only way, I realized, to truly meet a city. A turn to the left brought me into a street lined with tiny shops. A tailor bent over his work, the soft whir of a sewing machine filling the quiet. A bakery where the air smelled of almonds and warm sugar. A florist arranging buckets of roses as if they were precious jewels. Another turn, and I found myself in a square no larger than a room, shaded by orange trees heavy with fruit. A fountain bubbled lazily in the center, and an old man sat on a bench, tossing crumbs to the pigeons, humming a tune that seemed as old as the stones themselves. Children ran through the alleys, their voices echoing, while cats stretched in the sun, too comfortable to bother moving as I passed. I stopped at a corner cafe with only 3 tables outside, each one covered with a red checked cloth. The waiter greeted me in Catalan first, then smiled when he switched to Spanish after seeing my hesitation. I ordered nothing more than a cortado, but he brought me a small plate of churros dusted with sugar, setting them down with a wink. I laughed quietly to myself as I dipped one into the coffee, the sweet and bitter mixing in a way that felt like the city distilled into taste. Warm, sharp, unforgettable. The hours slipped away without notice. I wrote in my notebook, capturing fragments. The chipped paint on a doorway, the way sunlight turned the stone golden, the sound of a guitar played lazily by a young man leaning against a wall. None of these were the famous sights people flew across the world to see, but they felt as important, maybe more so. These were the details that made the city real. Later, as the light began to fade, I wandered uphill toward a viewpoint the cafe owner had suggested. The climb left me breathless, but when I reached the top, the city unfurled before me in every direction. The spires of La Sagrada Familia pierced the sky in the distance, cranes still circling its eternal work. Beyond, the Mediterranean glowed faintly, the horizon blurring into twilight. The rooftops shimmered like a sea of terracotta, and somewhere in the heart of it all, I knew the plazas were already alive again with music and laughter. Standing there, I realized how much Barcelona had already given me. Not only its spectacle, its colors, its rhythm, but its ordinary heart. The hidden squares, the old man with his pigeons, the cats stretched in the sun. These were the pieces I would carry with me, the ones that would surface later when I thought of Spain. As I walked back down, lanterns flickered to life one by one, guiding me into the embrace of the streets once more. The city hummed softly, not demanding, not shouting, simply existing in all its layers. And I thought, this is how you learn to love a place. Not only by dancing in its plazas, but by listening to its quiet corners, by letting it surprise you when you're not searching.
That evening, I found myself pulled into a narrow street lit by yellow lamps, their glow softer than the harsh daylight. The air was warm, fragrant with garlic and roasted peppers drifting out from kitchens. Somewhere nearby, a radio played an old ballad, the singer's voice cracked with longing. I had no plan, no destination, but then I noticed a wooden door left half open, laughter spilling out with the smell of wine. It was a bar, small, crowded, and alive. Tables pressed close together, the kind of place where elbows touched and conversations overlapped. I hesitated at the threshold, but the bartender spotted me, lifted a brow, and, with a quick nod, invited me in. I slipped inside. the chatter wrapping around me like a shawl. The walls were dark, lined with photos of bullfighters, faded posters of festivals, bottles stacked in precarious towers. I found a seat at the bar, and before I could stumble through my order, the bartender placed a glass of deep red wine in front of me. He said, "Ribera," simply, his accent rolling the word into something richer. I thanked him clumsily, and he grinned, switching into broken English that made us both laugh. "First time in Barcelona?" he asked. I nodded, and soon the questions came. Where was I from? How long was I staying? Had I seen Gaudi yet? Around us, the bar grew louder. A group of students argued cheerfully over football, their voices rising with each refill of beer. An older couple clinked glasses in quiet ritual, their smiles as steady as the years between them. Two musicians squeezed into a corner, one with a guitar, the other with a cajon, and soon the room had its own rhythm. The beat threaded through the laughter, through the clatter of dishes, through the pulse of my chest. The bartender leaned close, his voice lowering over the music. He said, "Barcelona is not only Gaudí and the sea, it is people, it is nights like this." He gestured toward the students, the couple, the musicians, and then at me. "You are part of it too now." I didn't know what to say. I raised my glass instead, and he raised his in return, the toast unspoken but understood. Later, the students pulled me into their orbit. Their English was patchy, my Spanish worse, but laughter filled the gaps. They taught me phrases, salud, bona nit, correcting my accent with exaggerated groans and cheers when I managed to get it right. They asked me about America, about my journey, about what I thought of their city. I told them honestly that it felt alive, more alive than any place I had been. Their smiles widened, proud and a little smug, as if I had passed a secret test. When the music swelled again, one of them tugged me from my seat. "Baila," he insisted, and soon I was moving clumsily among them, my laughter as loud as theirs. The floor was sticky, the air thick, but I had never felt lighter. For a moment, I forgot that I was alone, forgot that tomorrow I would be a stranger again. Tonight, I belonged. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough. Later, I stepped back into the night. The street was quieter now, the lamps casting long shadows across the stones. I carried the warmth of the bar with me. The laughter, the music, the simple kindness of strangers who had folded me into their night without hesitation. And for the first time since arriving, I didn't feel like a visitor. I felt like part of Barcelona's story, even if only a footnote.
Barcelona at night was not the same city I had walked through by day. When the sun sank and the last glow of evening gave way to darkness, something shifted in the air. The streets didn't sleep. They seemed to wake more fully, as if daylight had only been rehearsal. The lamps flared brighter, voices carried longer, and the music was everywhere. I followed the hum of life down the Ramblas, where vendors still lingered, their stalls lit by strings of bulbs that buzzed faintly. Crowds surged in both directions, a river of people. Tourists wide-eyed, locals moving with the certainty of routine. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts from a cart, sweet and smoky, mixing with the perfume of night-blooming flowers from balconies above. Somewhere nearby, a saxophone cried out, its notes tangled with the distant thrum of bass from a club. I turned into a side street where neon signs flickered pink and blue, pulling me toward their glow. A doorway spilled laughter and pulsing beats, and before I could change my mind, I stepped inside. The club was dark but alive, lights cutting the air in bursts of color. The music was relentless, a rhythm that pressed against my ribs and demanded surrender. Bodies swayed and spun, strangers brushing against each other without apology, sweat and perfume thick in the heat.
I found myself dancing again. Clumsy, hesitant at first, then looser as the night stretched. A woman in glittering heels smiled at me, twirling me into her circle of friends. Their laughter folded around me, and soon I was moving as if I had always belonged, as if Barcelona had claimed me once more. Hours disappeared in the pulse of the music. Later, I slipped outside, breathless, the cool air sharp against my damp skin. The city was still awake, still glowing. I wandered down alleys strung with lanterns, past bars overflowing onto sidewalks where people sat shoulder to shoulder with glasses of vermouth, talking with the intensity of poets. Every corner offered something different. A jazz trio playing in a dim tavern, flamenco spilling from an open courtyard, electronic beats pounding from a rooftop. Barcelona didn't have one voice at night. It had hundreds, layered, competing, and somehow harmonizing into a single song. Near the Gothic quarter, I paused under an archway. The stones were centuries old, dark and worn, yet tonight they vibrated with life. Students perched on steps with guitars, their voices rough but joyful. Children still awake, chasing each other around the fountain. Couples kissed in the shadows as if the world had shrunk to only them. And above it all, the bells rang midnight, solemn and resonant, grounding the frenzy of the streets with the reminder of time. I bought a small glass of cava from a vendor who laughed at my accent, but poured generously. I drank standing in the street, bubbles sharp against my tongue, the sweetness curling into my chest. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the city swirl around me. Footsteps, laughter, horns, music, shouts, whispers. It was chaos, but a chaos that felt like home, if only for a night. By the time I made my way back toward the hotel, the horizon was already softening with the first suggestion of dawn. The streets were quieter, though not silent. A few revelers still lingered, their voices hoarse but happy. A baker carried trays into a shop, the smell of rising bread announcing the new day. Life in Barcelona never stopped. It only shifted, trading one rhythm for another. As I climbed the stairs to my room, my body aching, my head spinning with wine and music, I realized I hadn't once thought of time. Hours had dissolved. The night had stretched itself into something endless. And maybe that's the secret Barcelona whispered to me. You don't measure nights here in hours, but in heartbeats.
Barcelona after dawn was a different creature altogether. Where the night had been wild, a blur of music and lights, the morning was steadier, quieter, as if the city itself needed to breathe. I opened the shutters of my small hotel room and leaned out, letting the cool air brush my skin. Below, the street was already awake, not with revelry, but with work. Delivery vans nudged their way between bicycles, shopkeepers pulled open metal shutters, and the scent of baking bread wafted from unseen bakeries. The chaos of the night had not vanished. It had transformed into something more ordinary, something that felt strangely intimate. I decided to wander again, but this time I let myself follow the rhythms of daily life instead of the glow of lanterns or music. The tourists were still asleep, their cameras tucked away, so the streets belonged to the locals. I passed a fruit shop where crates of melons and peaches spilled onto the sidewalk. The owner, a man with weathered hands and a voice like gravel, argued amiably with a supplier while rearranging his display. Around the corner, a woman swept her doorstep, pausing to greet a neighbor with a kiss on both cheeks. Two children chased each other down the alley, their laughter bouncing off the walls, while their grandmothers scolded them half-heartedly from a doorway. I ducked into a tiny cafe, the kind without a name painted outside, just a faded awning and a chalkboard scrawled with today's offerings.
Inside, the counter gleamed with pastries dusted in sugar, still warm from the oven. I ordered a cafe solo, and the barista, barely glancing up, poured it into a thick porcelain cup with a speed that told me he had done it 1,000 times. The bitterness jolted me awake, and I savored it slowly, watching the room. Old men leaned on the counter, reading newspapers, pausing only to argue about politics. A young woman tapped away on her laptop, headphones sealing her in a private world. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the Barcelona on postcards, but it was the Barcelona that lived, day after day, with or without me. Afterward, I wandered toward a quieter district, leaving behind the Gothic quarter's heavy stones. Here, the buildings were simpler, their paint faded but still bright. Yellows, blues, pale pinks. Laundry swayed between windows like banners of ordinary life. I passed a tailor, hunched over his machine, the steady hum filling the shop. A florist arranged buckets of lilies, pausing to brush the petals gently as if greeting old friends. I watched for a long moment, struck by how much care could be hidden in something so routine. By midday, I found myself in a small square shaded by sycamore trees. Children played football in the open space, their shouts rising over the thump of the ball. A group of women sat on a bench, gossiping, their hands moving as fast as their words. An old man whistled to his dog, who bounded joyfully after a stick. I sat on the edge of the fountain, sketchbook in hand, and let the ordinary details seep into me. Pigeons flapped around the water, scattering when a boy ran through their midst. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling the stones with patches of gold. It struck me then how rare it was, as a traveler, to see this side of a city. Tourists came for the landmarks, the Gaudí houses, the flamenco shows, the glitter of the Ramblas. But what lingered with me more was this: the way a grandmother balanced a basket of bread on her hip, the way a shopkeeper smiled to her regulars, the way life continued in its quiet rituals, unbothered by those passing through. As I walked back, I thought about how easy it was to mistake spectacle for truth. But Barcelona's truth wasn't only in its cathedrals or its music. It was in its mornings, in its unremarkable corners, in the way its people carried on with a rhythm that belonged only to them. I returned to my hotel as the afternoon heat began to press down, my notebook filled not with monuments, but with sketches of faces, doorways, and small gestures. These were the things I wanted to remember, because someday, when the memories of lanterns and music blurred, it would be the ordinariness of Barcelona that would remind me I had really been here.
The city had already shown me its streets and plazas, its markets and corners where daily life unfolded like a secret. But I wanted to see Barcelona from above, to understand how all those veins and arteries connected into one living body. And so, one bright morning, I set out toward Montjuïc, the hill that rose on the city's edge, promising a view that would stretch from the sea to the mountains. The climb began gently, through tree-lined paths where joggers passed me with headphones and couples strolled with their dogs. The higher I went, the quieter it became. The hum of traffic faded, replaced by birdsong and the whisper of leaves stirred by the breeze. My breath grew heavier, my steps slower. But with each turn of the path, the city unfolded a little more. Terracotta rooftops spilled below me like scattered tiles, their colors deepened by the morning sun. Halfway up, I stopped at a stone wall and leaned against it, catching my breath. From there, I could already see La Sagrada Familia piercing the skyline, its towers stubbornly unfinished, yet majestic. To the left, the sea shimmered, its surface broken by ships drifting lazily toward the port. Beyond, faint in the haze, the mountains framed everything, holding the city in their vast embrace. It was as if Barcelona itself had been placed in a bowl, one edge blue, one edge green, and within, a mosaic of life constantly in motion.
I continued upward until I reached the fortress at the summit. Its stone walls were thick, weathered, a reminder that this peaceful hill had once been a place of defense. Now it was filled with tourists snapping photographs, families unwrapping picnics, children racing along the ramparts. I walked slowly along the edge, letting the wind press against me, stronger up here than below. My hair whipped across my face, and I laughed at the wildness of it, the freedom of standing so high above everything. From this vantage point, Barcelona looked both vast and intimate. I could trace the sweep of the Ramblas, see the grid-like order of the Eixample, follow the curve of the coastline. The city that had overwhelmed me on the ground seemed suddenly fragile, a patchwork stitched carefully between land and sea. I thought of the nights when I had been swallowed by its noise, the mornings when I had lost myself in its markets, the afternoons when I had sat quietly in hidden squares. All of it was here, visible in miniature, yet alive with memory. I sat on a bench overlooking the port, sketchbook open in my lap. My pencil traced the line of the coastline, the sharp angles of the cranes, the sweep of the sea beyond. But my thoughts wandered more than my hand. Travel does this. It pulls you out of the present even as it anchors you in it. I thought of all the places I had yet to see, the balconies of Paris waiting like promises, the fountains of Rome whispering my name. But I also thought about how easy it would be to stop here, to let the city hold me a little longer. As the sun climbed higher, I made my way back down, the paths busier now with families and cyclists. At the base of the hill, life resumed its rhythm. Cars honking, vendors shouting, music spilling from open doors. Yet I carried the height with me, the memory of how the city looked from above, its chaos softened, its beauty undeniable. Barcelona had shown me another face, not the dance of its plazas or the colors of Gaudí, but its wholeness, its shape against the sea. And I realized that sometimes you have to climb above a place to understand how deeply you have fallen into it.
My last night in Barcelona felt different even before it began. The air carried a sharper edge, as if the city itself knew I was leaving and wanted to etch every detail deeper into my memory. I left the hotel slowly, pausing at the doorway, eyes sweeping over the familiar street one last time. The lamps glowed their usual golden halos, balconies leaned close with their flowering plants, and the murmur of voices rose from the cafes below. But tonight, each sound seemed louder, each color brighter, each scent more insistent. I wandered without a plan, letting my steps be pulled toward the hum of music. Near the Gothic quarter, I found a plaza I hadn't visited before. Strings of lights hung in loose arcs above the square, their glow softer than the lanterns of the Ramblas. People crowded around long tables, sharing food and laughter, their faces illuminated in fragments. A guitarist sat on the fountain's edge, his fingers weaving songs into the warm night air. Children darted between the tables, chased by bursts of laughter, while older men argued cheerfully over wine, their voices gravelly but affectionate. I bought a glass of cava from a vendor at the edge of the plaza. He filled it generously, his eyes crinkling with a smile, as though he knew what it meant to drink on your last night in a city. Half celebration, half farewell. I raised the glass, let the bubbles sting my tongue, and felt the sweetness spread through me. Around me, the plaza swirled with movement, yet I felt perfectly still, as if time had paused just to let me take it all in. Later, a group of travelers noticed me scribbling in my notebook. "You're writing about us, aren't you?" one of them teased, a tall woman with sunburned cheeks. Her friends laughed, and before I could protest, they waved me over. I joined their table, squeezing onto the bench between strangers who would not remain strangers for long. They poured me wine, offered bites from their plates. Olives slicked with oil, slices of manchego, bread still warm from the oven. Our languages overlapped and collided, but the laughter filled the gaps where words faltered. Someone suggested we walk to the beach, and soon we were spilling out of the square, carrying bottles and laughter down narrow streets. The sea welcomed us with its steady breath, waves rolling under the moonlight. We sat in a haphazard circle on the sand, shoes kicked off, voices lowered to match the rhythm of the tide. Stories unfolded, some real, some exaggerated, all shared freely. I leaned back on my elbows, eyes lifted to the stars, and felt the night sink into me. There was a moment, quiet and fleeting, when I realized how deeply this city had carved itself into my heart, not because of the landmarks or even the music, but because of nights like this, unplanned, ordinary in their chaos, extraordinary in their intimacy. To arrive a stranger and to leave with laughter still ringing in my ears, that was Barcelona's gift. When at last we parted ways, hugs exchanged, promises to keep in touch, though we all knew they would fade, I walked alone along the shore. The sea stretched endlessly, the city glowing faintly behind me. My footsteps pressed briefly into the sand, only to be washed away by the waves. And I thought, perhaps this is what it means to love a place. Not to possess it, not to stay forever, but to let it leave its imprint on you, even as you leave none on it. Back in my room, I packed my things slowly, folding clothes that now carried the sense of markets and bars, the faint traces of wine and sea. My suitcase closed with the same finality as a book, but I knew the story was not finished. Tomorrow, another city waited, another chapter. Yet, as I lay in bed, the sounds of Barcelona drifting faintly through the shutters, the distant strum of a guitar, a burst of laughter carried by the wind, I whispered into the dark, "Thank you." Because this city had given me more than nights and mornings. It had given me back a piece of myself.
The morning of my departure arrived quietly, though inside me nothing was quiet. I awoke before the alarm, the shutters still closed against a rising sun. For a long moment, I lay in bed, listening to the muffled roll of a suitcase across cobblestones outside, to the clatter of dishes from a cafe below, to the birds that had just begun their chorus on the rooftops. Barcelona was stirring, already alive, and I was about to leave it. Packing took minutes, but every fold felt like an act of farewell. My clothes smelled faintly of the city, smoke from tapas bars, the salt of the sea, the sweetness of oranges from the market. I zipped the suitcase slowly, my hand lingering on the handle, unwilling to give the final tug. The room was bare now, but my heart was full. The taxi carried me through streets I had already begun to memorize. The Ramblas, still quieter than I had ever seen them, still carried traces of last night's revelry. Confetti scattered like forgotten stars, a wine bottle rolling lazily against the curb. Shopkeepers raised shutters, sweeping thresholds, their gestures both routine and ceremonial. The city didn't pause for my leaving. It never would. And yet, I felt as though it was watching me go. At the airport, the chaos swallowed me. Lines of travelers snaking in every direction, announcements tumbling over one another, the clink of luggage against tile. I checked my bag and carried only my notebook and passport, the two things that felt most essential. At the gate, I pressed my forehead against the glass, looking out at the plane waiting on the tarmac. Its wings caught the light, stretched wide, ready to carry me forward. I opened the notebook and began to write, trying to catch the fragments before they slipped away. The rhythm of heels on cobblestones, the red dress swirling in a plaza, the sweet shock of cava bubbles, the hush of Gaudi's forest of stone, the old man feeding pigeons in a hidden square,
the laughter of strangers who had welcomed me into their night. Each line was a thread, and together they wove the tapestry of a city that demanded I surrender and rewarded me with belonging. When the boarding call echoed, I felt a pang, sharper than I expected. I stood slowly, closed the notebook, and tucked it under my arm. As I walked toward the plane, I thought, leaving isn't erasing. The city would stay in me, in the way I now crave rhythm, in the way I could still taste salt and spice on my tongue, in the way I would always remember how it felt to be pulled into a dance I didn't know, but chose anyway. The plane lifted, and Barcelona shrank below, its spires and rooftops dissolving into a patchwork of red and gold. The Mediterranean shimmered, vast and endless, carrying the city's reflection until it vanished in the clouds. I pressed my hand against the window, whispering a silent promise. I will return. Ahead of me, another city waited, Paris. A balcony at dusk, rooftops glistening after rain, a glass of wine in my hand, the hum of violins drifting up from the street. If Barcelona had taught me to surrender, Paris, I felt, would teach me how to linger. And with that thought, I closed my eyes, carrying Barcelona with me into the sky, already reaching for the next story.